Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the national Bleav Network. We're talking the fast rise and Slowik fall of the Texans offense and the potential future OC. And hey, look who's back. It's our old co-host and now co-host of Area 45 weeknights on Sports Radio 610. It's Shaun Bijani. What's up, brother?
What's happening, man? Appreciate you having me.
So I'm curious, what was your immediate reaction, brother, to the firing of Bobby Slowik? Did you see it coming after DeMeco's very, very brief defense of Bobby at the Monday presser?
After that, for sure. But prior to that, just kind of given what we saw from the offense in the postseason, putting up 32 points against the Chargers and moving the ball as best as we possibly could have imagined against the Chiefs. And we know all of the things, that very Texan typical game against the Chiefs. If it could go wrong, it would go wrong. It did go wrong. But yeah, after that brief defense, which was, I think, the shortest response of any question DeMeco Ryans was asked, I was like, doesn't sound good for Bobby. At the end of the day, I was slightly surprised that they decided to move on from Bobby Slowik, because the surprise stems from, I think, their willingness to go outside of CJ's comfort zone, their comfort zone, and not worry about CJ and his inability to handle like switching another system or dealing with another coach. But it also gave me faith in CJ. I mean, we knew he's smart, from last year. We can tell, we see and watch him and listen to him at a podium on a weekly basis. We know the guy's got a great head on his shoulders. He's got great football sense, but it let me know that they're not worried about him adapting to another coach or potentially another system or new wrinkles within a similar system. So for that reason, I mean, I'm kind of looking forward to this next hire. There are a lot of questions, obviously, and I know we'll probably get into a few of them here. Just how married, to this current scheme or whatever iteration they decide to go forward with it. Are they actually? But I think whatever they do, they believe that CJ is more than equipped, and there's other pieces around him on offense that are more than equipped to handling it going forward. Ultimately, I think when you make this decision, you come to the determination, and I believe DeMeco really needed a few days and almost the entire week to sit and think and contemplate and make a hard decision at the end of the day that, hey, can Bobby Slowik really be the guy to take us to the next level? And they ultimately decided that no, he's not the most well-equipped guy. You have to have 2, 3, maybe 4 guys max in mind already that you think you're going to be able to bring in-house to help do that for this offense. And it's going to be interesting to see who that is. I'm almost 100% confident it cannot be anybody in-house.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was going to mention a couple guys that are in-house guys in a little bit, but I want to go through the outside guys to begin with. Potential OC candidates one by one. The biggest name, probably Chip Kelly. DeMeco says he was a huge influence on him when he played for Kelly on the Eagles, even though he did coach at Ohio State and he got the championship there. He came well after CJ Stroud. So, there's no real Stroud connection other than, they both were at Ohio State. And in 3 seasons with the Eagles, his offense ranked 2nd, 5th, and 12th in total yards. His QBs were Michael Vick, Nick Foles, and Sam Bradford those years. So the rankings sort of fit with the guys that you hear the names. And in his first season with the Niners, they were 31st, but the QBs were Blaine Gabbert and Kaepernick.
Yeah.
It's been 8 years since he coached in the NFL, Shaun. How do you feel about Chip Kelly, offensive coordinator?
In terms of the most proven veteran guys, somebody that's won at not just at the NFL level and has seen a lot of success on the offensive side there, but I mean, obviously college as well. He's, to me, the guy that has the most pelts on the wall and the guy that I'm looking most closely at. And you mentioned it, and I think all of us in, Houston sports media probably went back in the archives and dug through and listened and watched DeMeco's first press conference as head coach when he's on the podium with Nick Caserio and Cal McNair, and wasn't asked directly about Chip Kelly, but rather like individuals that helped him along the way. And Chip Kelly was the first guy that he brought up in terms of being the most innovative and forward thinking and a great mentor to him and somebody that he looked up to. Well, if he was on his mind then at that point in time, it's hard to believe for me that he wouldn't be at the top of this list now when he needs an offensive coordinator in the most pivotal time of this franchise. And what I mean by that is, look, let's be honest. This team has never been higher on the food chain. This team has never been better equipped to win in the NFL than it is right now, with cornerstone pieces on both sides of the ball. So if you want to take your team to the next level, you got to go for the big fish, the most proven fish, and the guy that is the most hungry, that you feel like can give you the best chance to get and squeeze everything they can out of the talent you have already in-house. That guy to me is Chip Kelly. You mentioned all the numbers. I'll even do you one better, and I think it means something. All of those really nice offenses that he'd had in his first 3 years in Philadelphia, you mentioned, 3 top 15s and 2 top 5 finishes in total offense. Look at their defenses that they had in Philadelphia. They weren't great. They were like bottom third of the NFL. What kind of defense do you have now? If you're able to marry a Chip Kelly-led offense with a DeMeco Ryans-led defense, this would immediately put the Texans legitimately in the top 5, maybe top 3 in the NFL in terms of total talent on both sides of the ball. You know they've got the personnel. Now they'd have the coaches to fit.
The huge irony is the guy that he replaced in Philadelphia as head coach, Andy Reid. So that's a little connection there. And
yeah,
another guy, Gary Kubiak's son, speaking of little cool connections to the Texans, his son Klint, another potential candidate for obvious reasons. Before being OC in New Orleans this season, he was a passing game coordinator for Denver, Minnesota, and San Fran. The previous 3 seasons, the Saints ranked 21st in yards per game, but Shaun, their QBs were Derek Carr and rookie Spencer Rattler. What do you think?
Well, for a guy like Klint Kubiak, who I think has coordinated an offense once in Minnesota in 2021, and then this past season in New Orleans, he's probably the only guy that comes to mind in terms of going and looking younger at an offensive coordinator and play caller that has any pelts on the wall. But to me, you don't move on from a guy like Bobby Slowik, who you hired to do this for the first time ever, and go to somebody else like Klint Kubiak that, okay, yeah, very similar system, and he's the closest in terms of lineage from Kubiak to the Shanahan tree that has evolved this system. I think you have to go talk to a guy like that, and not saying that he should be immediately eliminated from consideration by my train of thought, but I think you're at the stage right now where the Texans maybe got a little too big for their britches this past offseason. And it was a great offseason. I think it was the best one that they had in the NFL, back-to-back years, by the way. But I don't think Bobby Slowik and this offensive line and the coaches were equipped to take this team to the next level. I don't know that Klint Kubiak is either, because we haven't seen it. And for that reason, I would just be skeptical, and he would not be maybe within my first top 2 or 3 choices for the next OC play caller.
Continuity is something I assume goes into that selection if they do go his direction, because obviously the system is something that he's similar, and he's done similar stuff with this system. And, he also interviewed for the Texans running game coordinator when DeMeco put his initial staff together. So those guys have a connection, obviously. Another option might be ex-Texans QB and coaching candidate, Josh McCown. Remember, he was a head coaching candidate, friend of Jack Easterby. He's coming off one bad season as Bryce Young's QB coach and one great season as Sam Darnold's QB coach. He learned under Kevin O'Connell, a Sean McVay disciple. That's good. Their offense ranked 12th in yards. But does he intrigue you, Shaun?
No. I like the coaching tree, but I like the Shanahan-Kubiak coaching tree better. I like proven guys better. I don't want somebody coming in learning on the job. We already did that. Bobby Slowik did that. Smart, a student on both sides of the ball, worked with DeMeco for a couple of years in San Francisco, and we saw how that worked out. Not saying that it's going to be the same every time you do or make a decision like that, but Josh McCown hasn't done anything in the NFL level to prove to anybody that he's equipped to handling a team that is built and will continue to build to win a freaking Super Bowl. Like, there's no chance. Like, the people that are standing on the Josh McCown table and will pound and die on that hill, I just think, for what? I don't understand that. Like, there's the intrigue is the coaching tree. You just mentioned it, and it's really cool. But the Texans are in no way in position to give this guy his first opportunity to coordinate an offense, to call plays for a franchise quarterback like CJ Stroud, you have a very short amount of time in the NFL to win and win now with the pieces that you've assembled. And it goes really fast. And I'm not willing, and I don't think many Texan fans would be willing to, one, give this guy the opportunity to learn on the job. And then two, the Easterby connection is something that is still very fresh on people's minds. There are a lot of people that don't like Nick Caserio still and will never, because he was here during the same time as Jack Easterby and those connections. And it might be something, it's probably nothing, but I think for that reason, it would be a really hard sell job for the Texans fan base.
Yeah, it might go over like a lead balloon PR wise. So that's another point to that. And Cal McNair very aware, it seems like, of the PR of the moves that he's making these days, which for good and for bad, sometimes that could backfire on you. But mostly I like the idea that, Cal McNair does have his ear out there to the fans. And I'm going to hit a couple more candidates. But before we roll on, I just want to remind our listeners about Underdog Fantasy. Underdog has a unique approach to fantasy sports with their simple pick'em style format. You can select players you believe will outperform expectations without the traditional daily fantasy drawbacks. And if you like drafting, which many fantasy owners feel like is the best part, Underdog offers simple drafts where you select a squad and compete for some serious cash. You'll find all the major leagues and college sports on Underdog, plus user-friendly interface, making it easy and fun to play. Jump in the fun by clicking the link and using the promo code HOU right in the YouTube and podcast description, easy for you to find. And if you do come aboard, you get a free pick and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Not a bad deal. Again, a free pick and $1,000 in bonus cash. So go check out Underdog and download their really cool app to your favorite mobile device. All right, Shaun, here's another name from the Sean McVay tree. A Rams passing game coordinator Nick Caley actually interviewed for the Texans OC job when Slowik got it. The Athletic's Robert May said, quote, "When you leave a conversation with Nick, it's kind of like leaving a conversation with Sean McVay." So high praise right there. It's also worth noting, Shaun, that he was an assistant under Caserio for 6 years in New England. So they do have that connection as well. What do you think about the idea of Nick Caley?
Aside from Klint Kubiak and Josh McCown, the first two guys that we discussed, Caley, because of those relationships with Caserio and obviously the tree, under McVay, that immediately is very intriguing. He's a young guy. He's got a lot of experience, but no experience in terms of a play caller, in terms of an offensive coordinator. I have to go back to what I'd said. Not to say that a first-timer can't flourish in a role, because we've seen over the course of the last 5 to 7 years in the NFL, organizations, shift to what I would say a forward way of thinking, getting coaches in, head coaches particularly in, that are very fresh off of their playing days or position coaching days, guys that can relate to players on their level. But can you coordinate an offense? Are you quick on your feet? Are you a guy that can adjust on the fly? Are you somebody that, is going to bring a scheme in and other people around you, i.e. maybe a new tight ends coach, certainly offensive line coaches in the Texans case, that are going to fit the personnel that's already here? Because I think that's the boat that the Texans are in. They're not in a situation to where they can just scrap everything on the offensive line and go get new guys. There's a lot of money still tied up into this offensive line for the next couple of seasons until you can even think about legitimately moving on. So I think there's a lot to weigh there when you consider, again, a guy that's never done the job before. You might like his lineage. You might like who he is as a person. You might like the way that he thinks about things. But is this going to be the guy? Now, hey, DeMeco Ryans, he'd never been a head coach before. He was a defensive coordinator for 2 years in San Francisco and one of the best in the NFL. And look at the job that he's done. Sure, I love that. I totally get it. I'm here for it. If DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio, and those are the two that we really need to be looking at, feel like that this is a marriage that can work, whether it's Nick Caley or Klint Kubiak, because I would assume if Klint Kubiak's coming aboard in some de facto advisory role, probably unpaid, Gary Kubiak would come too, and I would love that. I'm here for it. I just want this organization to make the most sound decision, and it deserves to be one that is fully explored. I think about like what the Chargers did last offseason. They interviewed like 15, 16, 17 dudes before they hired Jim Harbaugh, but everybody knew they were hiring Jim Harbaugh. It's about going out and talking to, meeting with, exploring other possibilities. Whereas if in 2, 3, 4 years' time, you need a coordinator, defensive or offensive, or a position coach, or for them, God forbid, another head coach, well, you've built that relationship. You know at least a little bit about those guys. The Texans are in no different of a space right now, needing an offensive coordinator and offensive line coaches. And for my money, I would assume a tight ends coach if they haven't fired Moreland already. I haven't seen anything this morning on it, but I think his job isn't safe. I don't think Ben McDaniel's job is safe. I don't think Jerrod Johnson's quarterback coaching job is safe. And I know he's supposed to be a candidate for the OC job, but you have to look at all avenues here if I'm the Houston Texans, and I think they will. Caley's got to be a guy that you have to strongly consider, and I think Nick will because of the relationships there.
Yeah, you mentioned Jerrod Johnson as an in-house guy. Bill Lazor, offensive assistant, is another name that's been dropped, in-house guy. Stroud's gushed about Johnson and their relationship, but you said it, Shaun. I'm pretty hesitant as well to replace somebody in the building that's been a part of this mess. And that's where I think, if you thought Jerrod Johnson had that sort of potential, Shaun, the point to do that, the point to see was during the bye week. You could have got rid of Slowik right then and brought in Jerrod Johnson the last few weeks and seen what he can do, take the training wheels off, because it looked at that point like it was not salvageable. If there was a way to correct it, I thought Bobby Slowik couldn't find that way to correct it. He was lost. So, that's my thing on Jerrod Johnson. Like, if you were going to do it, you missed your opportunity to see what he actually could do.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. And look, every NFL team has just one bye week, but I felt like the Texans this year had two. You remember they had that Thursday night game. I think it was the Jets, and then they didn't go ahead and play, I think, until the following Sunday night or a Monday game. They called that kind of like a mini bye. And it's yet another opportunity in the course of a season where you do a lot of self-evaluation. And we obviously know at that point in time, Bobby Slowik's seat was getting hot then. And we were talking about like, boy, do the Texans need to move off. If they'd felt like Jerrod Johnson or Bill Lazor or somebody in-house was better suited to call the plays and coordinate the offense at that point in time, you do that. Then again, the same goes for their actual bye week. When you're self-scouting and you're still not able to come to that determination, then fine. I don't know that you can hire Jerrod Johnson. And again, this is more than just about PR. We're talking just football sense. We're talking about business sense here. If you hire Jerrod Johnson, then I have to call into question seriously why you didn't do that during the course of the most pivotal season in franchise history. Why is he going to be better suited to do this job in the next 2, 3, 4 years and beyond, maybe? And he wasn't equipped enough to do it the final 4, 5, 6 weeks when you had, the most important games in your franchise's history that lay ahead. I know Jerrod Johnson and CJ Stroud have a relationship that extends beyond their NFL days. Jerrod was somebody that knew CJ at a very young age, through coaching and, camps and stuff like that. And that's fine. That's great. Jerrod wants to further his career as well. Jerrod interviewed for a handful of offensive coordinator jobs last offseason. Ultimately, will he get one? I think yes, absolutely. When you have some pelts on the wall and you can say, hey, look, I've worked with and developed a quarterback like CJ Stroud, a franchise guy, other people want that. Other people want to know how and why. And if you can do it for us, I think he's going to get an opportunity. I would really like for it to be here as a quarterback coach and maybe an assistant offensive guy. But at what point, do you hit that ceiling? I think Jerrod, he already got a pay raise for this past offseason. I would assume took on more responsibility this past season. At what point is he just ready to move on and look for bigger and brighter things in a path that is going to lead him ultimately to a coordinator spot? And I would presume ultimately a head coaching opportunity.
And again, the fan base, I don't know how excited they're going to be about this guy. Okay, he was in-house. If he was a guy that you liked or he was a guy that you thought was good, why was he, not given that chance midseason? Or why
wouldn't that be Robert, wouldn't that be like the most Dallas Cowboy hire ever? Like it would be like them hiring Brian Schottenheimer as their head coach, because they did. If you hired Jerrod Johnson as the offensive coordinator, it would be the same thing. And I think it would almost be exacerbated a little bit because the guy was already considered before Josh McCown. If you went to either one of those two guys, I think Texan fans would be pretty livid.
If he could have done something, why didn't he do it? I
Yeah.
know he wasn't right there at the helm calling the plays on the sidelines, supposedly, but like if he could have changed some of the things, if he would have brought in some new ideas, because it wasn't just game day stuff. This was prep stuff that I felt like they just weren't making adjustments game to game, during game, obviously, but that's more of a Bobby Slowik. That's where he's going to have to change things. But, game to game, that's the stuff that we just didn't see. And I just want to give credit also to John Crumpler, friend of the show. We love John. He did a great job coming up with some of these names and connections and stuff, as well as Aaron Wilson, who we're both good friends with. And, both those guys are doing a great job getting out some really good names in this. Are there any other names that you've heard as we record Sunday morning that might be potential guys?
I think we covered all the main ones right now. We talked about Kubiak, Josh McCown, Chip Kelly to me is the biggest one. It's kind of wait and see. That's kind of the list right now. I'd be interested in, look, I think we already started to do this last offseason when we thought Bobby Slowik was going to go get a head coaching job somewhere. We started looking at like, hey, who's the next guy in the Shanahan system? You'd felt like the Texans had already kind of grasped at straws when they hired Bobby because, well, here's a guy that is just a few years removed from working for PFF. And he was on the opposite side of the ball just, a couple of years prior to that, working on defense. This is still a guy who had not coached quarterbacks or coordinated an offense or been a play caller before. Who's supposed to be the next guy like behind Bobby Slowik in that Shanahan system, if you will? So I feel like that's kind of where we're at. And that's why I feel like, okay, yeah, you're looking at guys like Nick Caley now, somebody that comes from a similar tree, McVay and something like that. Chip Kelly, if his name was not Chip Kelly, if it was, something else, but he had the pelts on the wall, I think that's what you need to be looking at. I think that's what they'd prefer is somebody that has had success and has failed before at both the NFL and college levels. Somebody that has been humbled, somebody that's had to fight through adversity, because you're not going to come here and it's not going to be, roses and rainbows. The honeymoon you saw very quickly was over for DeMeco Ryans. He has not himself escaped criticism, nor should he. A lot of the decisions that were and were not made throughout the course of the year, I think he has to own. Offensive line, particularly the last game. Ultimately, it's his call as the head coach. Why you decided to change things up and go back with Shaq Mason at right guard and not stick with Juice Scruggs, who was a part of the offensive line the previous two games that was the best iteration of it that we'd seen all season long. He has to wear stuff like that too. So this is the most pivotal decision for this organization ever in its history, in my opinion. Certainly de facto, that means it's the biggest decision DeMeco Ryans will have yet to face as head coach of this team. So they need to be considering everybody. I think you'd always like to bring in a guy that's been there, done that. It's comforting knowing that somebody's been through those same struggles before and even at a higher level that DeMeco hasn't yet endured as an NFL coach. So Chip Kelly to me is my number one choice.
Yeah, you just set me up perfectly because that's what I was going to bring up next. This is the biggest decision of DeMeco's tenure without question. According to my salary cap info, and I'm sure you and Patrick have talked about this, the only way you can really improve the Texans is the draft, the new OC, and the new O-line coach. There isn't going to be the splashy names and the guys that are going to come in. They don't have the money to do that with what they've got left. So this is such a huge decision for DeMeco and his tenure. And maybe, Shaun, this is the most important decision of CJ Stroud's career right now.
100% agree with that. The offensive line is really the big key here. You could bring in anybody to coordinate this offense, but if you don't have the right guys, the right scheme to better protect CJ Stroud, then it doesn't matter. You could draw up the greatest looking plays on a napkin and it looks great on a whiteboard. It looks great in practice when you're walking and jogging through stuff. We know what it looks like on Sundays with an offensive line that from day one, Robert, looked disjointed. didn't look like it was on the same page with the rest of the offense. You need another leader of men offensively, as DeMeco Ryans is clearly defensively. And that's not to take anything away. We don't talk enough about Matt Burke. Matt Burke, he's a legit, badass in the job that he does with the defensive linemen. But you need that guy on offense. It needs to be kind of split up, and not to say that DeMeco, can't handle it, but he shouldn't have to worry about as much of the offense as he probably has the last year and a half. And why is it falling short? Why is it not even coming close to meeting the standards that I've set for my defensive guys? I also think that's something that he needs to wear as well as a head coach. You need to hold those offensive linemen to the same high standard that you do your defensive linemen. And I don't think he's done that in press conferences. And I clearly think he hasn't done that on a practice field, because if he had, it would have translated to the game field. And for an offensive line group that has been probably the most undisciplined in the biggest situations in the course of a regular season and postseason, it's pretty clear to me that he hasn't. So that needs to be fixed. The offensive line is the key. Tunsil isn't going anywhere. Titus Howard's not going anywhere. Juice Scruggs, obviously. Jarrett Patterson, Blake Fisher, those guys are here to stay. Shaq Mason's a guy that I would be shocked if he's back for this next season. It's a very similar contract situation for him that it was for Robert Woods, who I think for a lot of us this past training camp thought the Texans were going to cut and eat the $5 million cap hit. Well, it's exactly what it's going to be for Shaq Mason if they decide to do that. So
a much bigger cap hit too for Shaq Mason. I Bleav it's close to 11, 12 million or something like that. This is the other thing. You said it, and I wanted to speak to that. And I've talked about it prior. Like, this offensive line is not a bunch of jokes and scrubs like we saw during the David Carr era. And I remember Alex Gibbs came in during that awful time, and they couldn't block anything. They couldn't block you and me during that time. It was terrible. And he comes in 08 and 09, and he starts getting the whole thing right. And for some reason, in my head, I thought he had been around even longer than that. He didn't even get to the Dwayne Brown era. He didn't even get to that part. He was only here for a couple of years, Shaun, but you remember this. It was a night and day. And the offensive line coach a lot of times can do way more by just being that much better than the last guy than any other position coach on the team. I mean, it's camaraderie, it's chemistry, it's a lot of stuff that's nothing about talent. And the Texans guys, it's not like they don't have talent either. There is talent in this group. There's no question. I mean, Larry Tunsil's a Pro Bowler. Titus, you look at his Pro Football Focus numbers at right tackle, he was really good. He's been good in past years. He's not great, but he's good. There's nothing wrong with Titus Howard. There's nothing wrong with some of these guys. It's just a matter of coaching, I think.
No, what I think is wrong is the coach's expectations and demands of what they think they should be getting out of some of the offensive linemen, out of the offensive linemen. What I mean by that is day one, DeMeco Ryans said this himself when he was asked, hey, what do you want the identity to be of this football team? And maybe even this offense. I think he was asked directly about that. And he said a run-first team. He wants dogs on the offensive line. At any point in time over the course of the last 2 seasons, could you attribute the moniker of dog to an offensive lineman? What Laramie Tunsil likes to use as to define anybody on either side of the ball, what he thinks of them? Dog. Okay, really? Well, pick them out for me, because I don't think they exist. Laramie's one in terms of a pass blocker, but he's not a great run blocker. From a schematic standpoint, man, not to get like too deep in the weeds on this, but I've been saying it all season long, and you just look at it with a lot of the screens that Bobby Slowik was calling, anything outside zone, the stretch, you're asking offensive linemen in a bunch set already from, let's say, the right hash to run an outside zone left and reach the hash or reach the point between the hash and the numbers. Laramie Tunsil ain't doing that. Kenyon Green certainly wasn't doing that. I don't want to see a left guard pulling who's named Kenyon Green, Kendrick Green, or anybody that is currently on this Texans roster, because they physically were not able to do it. Now, if you want to get some different body types in here or have them change theirs and become more athletic to execute those types of plays, I guess I'd be here for it. but it's going to be a new offensive line coach with some different ideas. You cannot squander what is left, and I think there's a couple of seasons, really good seasons left in what you have in Joe Mixon. You can't squander that, man. You can't squander any more years of CJ Stroud's rookie contract. You can't squander any more years of Nico Collins. You've got to seize the opportunity now, and they got to get a guy in here that is the best possible fit for what CJ Stroud and the other talent that's around him is capable of right now at this stage of their career.
After this year, you've also got financial situations coming up beyond, the guys that we think of are big deals, and you're going to have to make some choices between this guy and that guy. It's coming really, really fast, unfortunately, if you're a Texans fan. And I just want to ask the listeners what they think about this offseason, about the coaching candidates. Get the YouTube comments, support us, and get updates by subscribing on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up and listen in the car while you're out and about with your favorite podcast app. What's the latest on Area 54 or 45? Area 54. Area 45 with you and Creighton.
We're on 6 to 10 now, Monday through Friday. So 6p to 10p every single night until the Super Bowl is concluded. So we got another couple of weeks. So that'll be nice. Getting off at 10 beats the heck out of getting off at midnight. And then once the Super Bowl is over, then Texans radio comes back and they'll get their hour back to start from 6 to 7. So then we'll be on from 7 to 11 the rest of the way until football season starts again. So we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, give them a call over on Area 45. Him and Creighton batting it around. Good stuff. And just really appreciate you giving us a few minutes on a Sunday, grabbing you on a Sunday, taking you away from the wife and kid. Really appreciate it, Shaun.
Thanks for having me, dude. I had to miss a lot of days this past week taking care of those guys because they had the flu. So I got like 4 hours to talk about this Bobby Slowik stuff. So I needed a little bit more.
That's great. Just one last thing before I go, because the Rockets had a hell of a week. Incredible Saturday. Let's not forget where they were. The Rockets were an NBA joke and a complete laughingstock 18 months ago. After the worst 3-year stretch in franchise history, a star player left a game at halftime, beat up his girlfriend, and was banned from the NBA. Today, they're number 4 in the league, 2 in the West, and beat the best NBA team twice in 4 days with a bunch of kids and exiled vets. They were laughed at and ridiculed by some in the fan base and many nationally for giving near max money to try-hard Fred VanVleet and handing over 4 years, $86 million to quote-unquote nutcase Dylan Brooks. The GM was a bumbling fool for mishandling the Brook Lopez negotiations and giving away first-round picks. Their just-fired coach was exonerated nationally for being a, quote, Rockets problem. Their new coach was a, quote, risky hire after being fired for personal reasons. 2 top 3 draft picks looked like bust. One was called undisciplined and a chucker who did not care about winning. The owner was being chastised for being a cheapskate who bought the team to make a profit. Today, they've got a state-of-the-art practice facility, massive new scoreboard, and the future is the envy of the NBA. Let's not forget, the Astros were a joke. The Texans were a joke. The Rockets were a joke. Nobody's laughing now. Their story is a life lesson for all of us in many, many ways. And look for one of our favorite Rockets analysts this Wednesday. Check that out. We'll look forward to talking to you guys soon. Have a wonderful week.
Amen.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.